Maybe you're sitting there right now doing the math on your monthly budget and it just isn't working. The bills are real. The groceries cost more than they did a year ago. And that 401k contribution coming out of every paycheck is starting to feel less like future security and more like money you desperately need right now. So you start wondering, what if I just pause it, just for a few months, just until things stabilize a little? And honestly, that thought makes complete sense given what you're dealing with. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't, but before you make that call, I want to walk you through something that most people don't fully see until after they've already made the decision. Because what looks like a simple pause on paper has a few layers underneath it that are worth understanding first. Before we get into this, if you're new here, hit subscribe. I put out videos every week on money, mindset, and the stuff nobody really explains properly. There's already content up on the channel that could genuinely shift how you think about your finances, so go check that out after this. Okay, let's talk. Here's where most people get this wrong. When you think about stopping your 401k contributions, the brain naturally frames it as a temporary solution to a real problem, a short pause, a practical adjustment, something you can easily reverse when life settles down. And that framing feels completely reasonable because in theory, it is reversible. You can restart contributions whenever you choose. But here's what the framing misses. Financial pauses rarely stay as short as intended. Life doesn't suddenly become simpler in 3 months. The thing that's tight right now tends to be replaced by the next tight thing, and the contribution that was supposed to restart in spring gets pushed to summer, then fall, then next year. The pause that felt temporary becomes the new default, and the compounding growth that should have been happening during those months simply doesn't exist anymore. Not delayed, not recoverable, just gone from the equation permanently. That's the gap between how this decision feels and what it actually costs, and most people don't see the second part clearly until the moment has already passed. Let me make this as concrete as possible, because the numbers here tell a story that the feelings don't. When you stop contributing to your 401k, a few things happen simultaneously. The most immediate thing is that your take-home pay goes up, but by less than you expect. If you're contributing 5% of a $60,000 salary, that's about $250 a month going into your retirement account. But because traditional 401k contributions come out before taxes, stopping them doesn't add $250 to your paycheck. Depending on your tax bracket, it adds closer to $190 or $200. The rest was going to taxes anyway. So the actual financial relief from pausing is smaller than the number on paper suggests. The second thing that happens is the employer match stops too. If your company matches even 50 cents on the dollar up to a certain threshold, which is common, you're not just pausing your own contributions, you're pausing theirs as well. That match is part of your total compensation. It's money your employer has set aside specifically for you that only releases when you contribute. When you stop contributing, you don't just lose future growth, you leave that match money sitting unclaimed. Which means the true cost of pausing is your contributions, plus the match, plus the growth that both would have generated. The third thing that happens is what happens psychologically once the money reappears in your paycheck. Human beings are remarkably good at absorbing available income into their lifestyle without noticing it happening. The $200 that came back into your take-home pay very often disappears into the general flow of monthly spending, not on anything specific, just into the noise of living. Which means 3 months later, you're not actually $200 ahead, you just spent it differently, and the retirement account is still sitting empty. There's also a subtler psychological cost that rarely gets discussed. Stopping a financial habit, even temporarily, resets your relationship with it. The contribution that was automatic and invisible becomes something you have to consciously choose to restart. And restarting something intentionally requires more psychological energy than continuing something that's already in motion. The longer the pause, the heavier the restart feels. Here's the reframe that I think matters most in this situation. The question most people ask is, can I afford to keep contributing? But the more useful question is actually the reverse. Can I afford the real cost of stopping? Because when you add up the lost match, the lost compounding, the tax impact, and the statistical likelihood that the pause extends longer than planned, the true cost of a 6-month pause on a meaningful contribution is almost always higher than the short-term relief it provides. It doesn't feel that way in the moment because the cost is invisible and future-facing. The relief is immediate and real. But that asymmetry, immediate relief versus invisible long-term cost, is exactly where the most expensive financial decisions live. The shift is this: instead of asking whether to stop entirely, ask whether there's a smaller number that keeps the account active and the match captured while still creating some breathing room in your budget today. So here's what this looks like in practice if you're genuinely stretched right now. First, find out exactly what contribution rate captures your full employer match. Log into your HR or benefits portal and look at the match structure. If your employer matches up to 4%, contributing 4% is the floor you want to protect if at all possible. Everything above that threshold is still valuable, but the match is the line worth defending first because the return on that specific portion is immediate and guaranteed. Second, before reducing contributions, consider reducing the rate rather than stopping entirely. Going from 6% to 3% is a very different decision than going to 0. It preserves the habit, keeps the account active, likely still captures at least a partial match, and creates some real relief in your paycheck without the full psychological and financial cost of a complete stop. Third, if you've already stopped and you're thinking about restarting, don't wait for a perfect moment. Pick a contribution rate that feels manageable right now, even 1 or 2%, and restart it this week. The gap is what it is. The best response to a gap is the smallest possible restart done as soon as possible and increased gradually from there. You're not irresponsible for asking this question. You're dealing with a real budget under real pressure, and you're trying to think it through carefully, which is exactly the right instinct. The fact that you searched for this before just clicking the opt-out button says something important about how seriously you're taking your financial future. The 401k isn't a luxury for people who have everything figured out. It's a tool that works best for people who are still figuring it out because it moves automatically, grows quietly, and builds something real in the background of a life that's busy and imperfect and constantly in motion. You don't need to be perfect with this. You just need to keep something moving in the right direction. Even something small, even something imperfect, because the version of you 10 years from now will feel the difference between the account that kept going through the hard seasons and the one that didn't. There's more on the channel that builds on exactly this. Go explore it when you're ready. Progress doesn't need to be dramatic to be real. It just needs to be yours.